So today we are doing the last day of this equations review little mini unit we're doing. We'll review tomorrow. We'll have a quiz on Friday. Today it's all about squares and square roots. The cool thing is that squares and square roots undo each other. So if it's something squared, you'll take the square root. If there's a square root, you'll square it, okay? They're called inverse operations. So here are our steps. You can go ahead and write these down. I'm going to add a little something. We are going to solve, put this with a plus minus.
Christmas gonna be right around the corner. For real.
True. All right, so when we're doing these, we solve for the x squared term. So you'll have like, let's just say x squared plus 4 equals 20, something like that. You got to get this part by itself first. We do that using inverse operations like we did the other day, right? So we'd have x squared equals 16. When you get down here, you have to undo this squared, right? We just want the x by itself, not x squared. We undo squaring the x by taking the square root. Does anyone know what the square root of 16 is? It's like what number times itself makes a 16?
Oh, 4.
A 4. So your answer would be 4. But you have to put this little symbol in the front, plus or minus. And the reason you do that is because 4 squared is 16, but negative 4 squared is also 16.
We gotta write
So
that.
anytime you take the square root, you put the plus or minus. You don't need to write that. We'll have enough examples. Just make sure you get all 3 steps. I just wanted to show you what the steps meant.
No.
So as soon as you notice that the x squared part is by itself, you can take the square root of both sides.
Right.
So it looks like this. Square root, square root.
Square.
So the square root and the square just undo each other. You just have the x equals, what is the square root of 121?
12.
You're close.
11.
No, 11.
11. And we just have to put the plus or minus in the front. Because
So what's
positive 11 would work and negative 11 would work if I plugged it back into the original equation. You probably have done this once. Yeah, this should all be a review. The second half of this, I'm not sure if you've seen, but I would be surprised if you haven't seen this.
I ain't like my.
This one's a little different because you see how the a squared part isn't by itself yet? It's being multiplied by 3.
6 squared.
Hold on. We got to undo multiplying by 3. How do you undo multiplying by 3?
Divide.
Divide by 3. So we're going to start by dividing both sides by
When we
3.
go with this, Miss Molly, can you do one of them on our homework for us?
Mhm.
Like 2, 3.
Mm-mm.
She said,
All right. So now I have a squared equals 75 divided by 3 is 25. Then what?
A squared. 5.
Yeah, but you got to put the
Okay.
plus minus in there. So a equals plus or minus 5.
Okay, so you will actually get this on.
What?
Oh no, like I'm gonna actually do this.
Oh, okay, good. Questions?
I almost texted my mama and told.
Tell her you're in math class and you can't talk right now.
I got it.
Okay. All right. Next. X squared plus 8 equals 32. So I can't take the square root right now. So what should I do? Yeah, first you want to subtract 8 from both sides. So we end up with x squared equals 24. Now, up until now, these have all been what we call perfect squares, where like a number times itself gave us that number. 24 is not a perfect square. So this is kind of like in the last chapter where we were solving for the triangles and we had to type it in the calculator, the Pythagorean theorem. So yeah, we got to type that in, the square root of 24. So Do you guys remember the square root button?
Yes.
Yep.
Second. And that's.
It's like the second and then the x squared button.
Yes.
I used to wear shirts like that. I had a blue one, but it wasn't that long.
Look at Miss It looks like a dress.
Okay. All right. Here's some calculators. Anyone know what the square root of 24 is?
No.
Let me see.
I forgot how to.
So it's like the second button and then the x squared button. 24 equals.
It's 500.
Other way. You squared it. Don't square it. Take the square root. You got to hit the second button first.
What second button?
The top left, it says second.
Oh.
And then the x squared button, it brings up a radical, this square root symbol.
It's 2 and 6.
I don't know. I can't do it. Oh my god.
She gonna teach me how to math.
It says 2.
So when you do it in the calculator, you get like 4.89.
Yeah.
That will round to 4.9, and we're going to put plus or minus in front still. So what's the first thing I want to do to get the x squared part by itself? Divide both sides by 4. Now, 9 over 4 does not simplify. Just leave it that fraction. Okay? Because when we take the square root, what's the square root of 9? 3. What's the square root of 4? 2. So you just end up with plus or minus. Don't forget the plus or minus. 3 over 2.
Why we gotta do that?
Because when you plug it in, when you plug it back in up here, the negative, when you square it, becomes a positive. So technically there's 2 solutions.
Did you please know how to do this answer?
I don't know.
No, not the plus or minus.
So it's like when we did these in the Pythagorean theorem, we didn't do plus or minus because we were talking about a distance, and distance isn't negative. So when you're doing it geometry based, you don't really need the minus, but algebra you do. So it's kind of tricky, but. All right, now this is the complete opposite. Do you see how this is the square root of b? To undo a square root, you square it. So if you have a little exponent of 2, you take the square root. If you already have a square root, you just square it. When you square it, you don't need the plus or minus. So I'm going to take each side to the second power like that. You actually don't need parentheses. Square it, square it. So those are gone. I have b equals, what's 3 squared? You were right, 9. You'll have some like this too. Yep. So these are what's called inverse operations. They just undo one another.
What you do?
3 times 3? Yeah, or 3 squared. There's that little x squared button. Same button, you just don't hit the second first. All right, here's number 6. These go pretty quick though. All right, do you see how this whole thing has a square root? How do you undo a square root? Square it. So now I'm going to square both sides. The n plus 7 is left on the left. What is 5 squared? 25. Do you think I'm done? No, you just got to subtract the 7. So it's just one little step at the end if there's more than one thing under the square root. You don't have a plus minus when you square it, only when you take the square root. It's tricky.
How many you got left? Which one? 2?
4.
4. All right, what should I do? Square it? Square it. That'll get rid of that guy. So I have 2x equals, what's 6 squared? 36. Divide by 2. Divide by 2. X equals, what's 36 divided by 2?
6. Oh, really?
Nope.
Who's this looking in your window, Miss Money?
I didn't see it. All right, 36 divided by 2. I gave you all calculators. Figure it out.
18.
18. Number 8.
What was that?
Hmm?
What was number 7?
18 was the answer for number 7.
Which one?
What?
Have you ever read, do you be reading books? We read, Mice and Men,
Yeah.
and Lenny, the end of the book, he strangled this girl, he was pulling her hair. He was feeling on me.
Yeah, I want to undo the square root, so I'm going to square it. 7 squared is 49 equals, over here we just have the x plus 9.
So did you do minus 9?
And then I'm going to subtract 9, so 40 equals x. All right, I am actually going to just stop and summarize here. I forgot we were on a shortened schedule today, so I'll take out the last 2 examples that we were planning.
Yes. I can't wait to go home and go
So today we solved with x squared and square root x. All right, last lesson of the semester. That's a nice feeling, isn't it?